My name is Daniel Price. I'm the new keeper assigned to Heseta Head Lighthouse, Oregon. The posting came through the Coast Guard 3 weeks ago, though it feels like a century has passed since I first stepped onto that narrow road carved into the cliffs. Most of the old lighthouses have been automated for years, but Heseta is different. It's a heritage site, as the paperwork called it. Still manned, still tended, still running on a schedule that hasn't changed in over 100 years. I arrived just after dawn. The sky was a washed-out silver, the kind that made it hard to tell where the ocean stopped and the fog began. The air carried that thick salt smell of seaweed and rusting metal. At the end of the drive stood the keeper's house. White clapboard, shutters peeling, a wraparound porch that faced the surf. The lighthouse itself rose behind it, perched on the ridge like a finger pointing into the gray. A man in his 60s was waiting by the porch steps. Stocky, heavy beard, uniform jacket faded from years of sea wind. His name was Grant McCall, the senior keeper. He shook my hand with a grip that felt more like a test than a greeting. "You're early," he said. "That's good. You'll want to get your bearings before nightfall." He led me through the house first. Small kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs, a cramped office downstairs where the logs were kept. The walls were lined with framed photos of the headland, each one showing the same beam cutting through the fog. I asked if those were from storms or rescues. He said, "Routine nights." Before we reached the tower, he stopped me in the doorway and handed over a small laminated card. It looked like a checklist, printed decades ago and yellowed at the edges. The title across the top read, "Regulations for Night Operations, Heseta Head Lighthouse." There were 7 rules listed. He made me read them aloud. Keep the lamp lit from 1800 to 0600 without fail. 2. Do not enter the service stair between midnight and Arrow 100 unless authorized. 3. Record every rotation of the beacon manually, even if the counter works. 4. Never turn off the foghorn manually. 5. Maintain radio contact with Station Florence every hour. 6. Keep the keeper's house curtains closed after dark. 7. If you hear footsteps in the service stair when you are alone, do not investigate. I gave a short laugh when I reached the last one. He didn't. These rules go back to 1894, Grant said. Most of them are protocol. Some are habit. You'll follow all 7 whether you think they're necessary or not. We climbed the spiral stair inside the tower, the air turning colder as we ascended. The lens sat in its glass cage, 12 feet high, rotating with a slow, patient rhythm. It was mesmerizing. That endless movement, smooth and heavy, each flash slicing through the fog every 10 seconds. Grant showed me how to check the kerosene backup, how to log the beacon rotation, how to grease the bearings that kept the mechanism turning. He worked without wasting a word. When I asked about the second rule, why not enter between midnight and 1, he said only, tradition. Old mechanics didn't like anyone near the lens during the hour change. That afternoon, he packed up his duffel. "I'm heading out tonight," he said. "You'll have the watch. Radio me if you get lost." I asked if he meant lost in the lighthouse or lost as in procedure. He didn't answer, just gave a short nod and drove down the gravel road until his truck disappeared into the fog. By dusk, I was alone. The sea had grown louder by then, every wave slamming into the rocks below like something trying to crawl up the cliff. Inside the tower, the lens revolved steadily, the motor humming with the same even tone. I checked the logbook. Handwritten notes from decades of keepers. The ink had faded, but the format hadn't changed. Date, weather, wind speed, visibility, lamp condition. At 1800, I lit the lamp as instructed. The beam cut out into the darkness, slicing the fog like a blade. The sight gave me a strange comfort. Out there, beyond that glow, the sea was all shadow and distance. Up here, there was order. I followed the checklist through the evening. Checked the generator, confirmed radio contact with Station Florence, logged the beacon rotations every 30 minutes. At 23:30, I made a note about the foghorn cycling automatically. The sound rolled across the cliffs at regular intervals, deep and bone-shaking, like the world's slow heartbeat. At 23:50, I brewed coffee and stepped outside onto the porch for air. The wind had died, leaving the night unnaturally still. Even the ocean sounded distant, muffled by fog. My reflection stared back at me through the kitchen window. Pale, floating, almost detached. The light behind me flickered once. When I checked the time again, it was EU0PO2. Rule 2. I wasn't supposed to be on the stair between midnight and 1. I hadn't planned to be, but curiosity has a way of creeping up when you're the only human being for miles. Still, I stayed put. I sat in the kitchen, pretending to read through maintenance reports while the minutes stretched thin. Around Eero 17, I heard it. A slow, heavy sound from the tower. Not the motor, not the wind, footsteps, metal on metal, deliberate, climbing the spiral stair inside the tower. I froze. Every creak was distinct. First step. Pause. Another. Then another. Closer. Echoing faintly through the wall that connected the house to the tower's base. It couldn't be Grant. He was long gone, and the only other access road was locked by a gate. I stood, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the thermal expansion of the old stairs, steel contracting in the cold. Or maybe a loose bracket shifting under vibration. Still, the sound continued, perfectly spaced, as though someone were walking up toward the lamp. I went to the base door of the tower. The padlock hung untouched. I pressed my ear to the metal. The footsteps stopped. The silence afterward was worse. I stepped back, closed the door again, and returned to the kitchen. My hands shook as I poured the coffee that had gone cold. Every logical explanation I came up with felt thinner than the fog pressing against the windows. At 01:03, I logged routine beacon check just to fill the page, then stepped outside again. The fog had thickened into a wall. The beam swept overhead, carving the mist into slow-moving ribbons of white. Somewhere far below, the foghorn droned again. The rest of the night passed in stretches of motion and stillness. The light turning, the sea breathing, my thoughts trying to steady themselves against both. By 05:30, the sky had begun to pale. When I made my final radio call before dawn, Station Florence responded immediately. Copy that, Hesita. Anything to report? I hesitated, then said, Routine watch. All systems normal. After I signed the log at 06:00, I finally stepped into the tower. The spiral stair gleamed faintly in the early light, still damp from condensation. On the third step, something caught my eye. A footprint, faint, salt-stained, pressed into the steel as if left by a bare foot. It wasn't possible. The surface was too cold, too slick for a print to hold. I rubbed at it with my sleeve until it vanished, leaving only a patch of fogged metal behind. That morning, when Grant returned to check the logbook, he said nothing about the rules. He just flipped through the pages, scanning my handwriting. When he reached the midnight entry, his hand paused above the paper. You heard them, didn't you? I said carefully, I heard something. Probably expansion in the stairwell. He shut the logbook. Keep it that way, he said. That's how we all make it through the first night. Then he walked to the window, pulled the curtain closed, and added quietly, almost to himself, Don't ever break the pattern, Daniel. Not once. Grant stayed for less than an hour that morning. He checked the lamp bearings, flipped through the maintenance logs, and replaced a fuse in the radio set. The whole time, he barely spoke except to say, "You'll get used to the noise." When I asked what he meant, he only said, "Everything up here has a sound. You just have to learn which ones belong." Then he left again, the truck's taillights vanishing into the fog like two dying coals. By 8 o'clock, the cliffs were clear. The morning sun turned the mist into a gold haze that made the lighthouse look almost peaceful, like a museum piece more than a living post. From the ridge, the sea looked endless, layered in blues and silvers. For the first time since I arrived, I felt something close to calm. I started my day checklist. Sweep the gallery deck, check the backup fuel tanks, polish the lens. I climbed the spiral stair, keeping one hand on the rail. Each step clanged softly under my boots. The smell of brass polish lingered from years of use, sharp and metallic. The glass panes caught the sunlight, scattering rainbows across the white interior. I told myself that this was all it was, an old building humming with age. Still, when I reached the top, I glanced at the third step. Clean, dry, no print. The rational part of my brain was satisfied. The other part, the part that had counted every one of those phantom footsteps the night before, stayed quiet. Around noon, I walked down to the generator shed. The air outside felt heavier, the sound of waves faintly distorted by distance. From here, you could barely see the road or the keeper's house, just the tower rising above the fog line. The shed smelled of oil and damp wood. Inside, the diesel generator thrummed steadily. Everything looked fine. I logged the inspection and headed back up. When I reached the porch, the radio crackled from inside the kitchen. I heard a faint voice, Florence Station, trying to raise me. I hurried in and grabbed the handset. "This is Hesita," I said. "Copy, static." Then, "Confirm your report, Hesita. Did you repeat your midnight check manually?" I frowned. "Yes, I entered the beacon data as instructed." "Good," the operator said. "Your log came through incomplete." "I sent it by voice only," I said. Manual relay was clear, a pause. Then, "Understood. Maintain hourly contact." Out, the signal clicked dead. I checked the paper log. Everything was normal except one blank space near 0040. I must have skipped a rotation entry without realizing. Or maybe I'd just written too lightly to show through the carbon sheet. Either way, I penciled it in again, then flipped back to older entries out of curiosity. The handwriting changed every few pages. Years of different keepers. But one note appeared again and again, scrawled in the margins in different hands, different decades. Heard steps, logged none. By late afternoon, the fog started rolling back in. It came fast, swallowing the cliffs in a pale blur. The wind shifted, driving cold air through the open window panes. I closed the shutters and drew the curtains just like the rules said. From inside, the sound of the surf turned hollow, like it was echoing through stone. I decided to make dinner early. Canned soup, bread, black coffee. The house creaked with every gust. There's a rhythm to coastal wind. After a while, you can tell when it's normal and when it isn't. Around 7, the pattern changed. Not stronger, not softer, just offbeat. A faint pause between gusts that made everything feel like the world was holding its breath. I turned the radio up just to fill the space. "Station Florence, this is Hesita," I said into the mic. "Evening check. Visibility moderate, foghorn active, lamp rotation steady." "Copy that, Hesita," came the reply. "Forecast reports light rain overnight. Maintain your intervals." I wrote it down in the log, then checked the clock. 19:04. 1 hour until full dark. That's when the lights flickered. Just once, long enough to make the shadows bend across the room. I checked the breaker panel. Everything was steady. The generator still hummed in the distance. but my pulse picked up. It wasn't fear exactly, more a kind of alertness, like every sound had sharpened at once. At 1930, I climbed to the tower again. The fog outside was thick enough that the beam barely reached 50 yards before dissolving. Each rotation swept past the glass like a slow heartbeat. The brass fittings glowed in the lamplight. I made the rounds, checked oil pressure, lamp temperature, alignment, all normal. Then I noticed the reflection. On the inner wall of the glass cage, faint but visible, a second light pulsed. It was out of sync with the main beam. Half a second late, softer, almost like a delayed echo of the real one. I looked for the source. There was nothing in the chamber that could cause a reflection like that. I stepped closer to the glass. The second light blinked again, following the main beam's path. Then it vanished. My breath fogged the glass. I told myself it was atmospheric distortion. Moisture bouncing the light off the fog bank, delayed by distance. That made sense. I wanted it to make sense. At 20 I reported to Florence again. The operator was someone new this shift, a woman with a steady voice. Hasita, confirm beacon rotation. We've got you at 5.6 seconds delay. Delay, I repeated. Rotations fixed at 10-second intervals. That's what we see on radar. Signal echoing twice. Maybe weather interference. Understood, I said, forcing my tone calm. We'll monitor. I logged the note, underlined it twice, then sat at the desk listening to the foghorn boom across the bay. The beam outside kept turning. Every flash reminded me that I was the only person for miles responsible for making sure it did. The hours crawled. The rain started just after 10. Fine drizzle, barely visible but loud enough against the window glass to sound like whispering static. I closed the curtains tighter. At 23, the radio sputtered again. Haseta, confirm you are secure. I am, I said. All systems functional. Pause. Grant said to remind you about the pattern. My stomach tightened. Copy that. The line went dead. By then I'd memorized the rules. I knew what pattern meant. Keep the light running, the horn sounding. The intervals logged, the curtains drawn. No improvisation, no deviation. The system had its rhythm, and I was part of it. I sat there at the kitchen table, pen poised above the logbook, listening for the one sound I didn't want to hear. Midnight was minutes away. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every second, until I couldn't tell if it was the mechanism or my heartbeat. Then, faintly, the steps began again. Same place, same timing, metal on metal, slow and deliberate, starting from the base of the tower. I didn't move. The rules said not to enter the stair, not to investigate. I stared at the wall and counted the seconds between each sound. 15 steps, then silence. I opened the radio mic, but didn't press transmit. What would I even say? Hearing structural movement again, probably expansion, the sound came once more. Not footsteps this time, but a scrape, like something metallic brushing the inner wall of the tower. Then, faintly, a knock. 3 soft taps against the base door. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. The sound didn't repeat. The foghorn's next call drowned everything. I waited 5 full minutes before opening the curtains a sliver. The beam swept across the porch. Nothing. Just fog. When I turned back, the kitchen clock read 00:58. The footsteps stopped exactly on the hour. Same as before. At 01 na, the silence felt heavy enough to breathe. I made a single note in the log. Yours. Iwikro Dirju1 Idir. Noise. Source unknown. No breach. By L2 Siu, exhaustion set in. I stayed awake out of pride more than duty, afraid that sleep might break the rhythm somehow. The house was cold, the air thick with salt. Every creak sounded human. When dawn finally arrived, I walked out to the cliff edge. The wind hit my face hard enough to sting. The world looked ordinary again. Waves, gulls, morning sun. The lighthouse stood behind me, calm, harmless. Back inside, I found something new in the log. Below my handwriting, faint pencil marks had appeared overnight. The same words, smaller, almost erased. Heard steps, logged none. By the third morning, the fog returned so thick it looked like smoke clinging to the cliffs. The beam was still running when I woke, a pale flicker bleeding through the curtains. The logbook sat open on the kitchen table where I'd left it. The pencil marks were still there, faint but real. I rubbed a thumb across the line and the words blurred, leaving a smudge of graphite. Someone had written them, or something had pressed the pencil just enough to dent the paper. Grant didn't come up that morning. I'd expected him by 7, like before, but the road stayed silent. I called Station Florence to confirm my shift. They said, "McCall's on leave for 3 days. You're primary." I didn't argue, just acknowledged the handoff and logged the note. 3 days. I'd be alone through 2 more nights. It wasn't fear that hit first. It was the weight of the place. How every wall creaked at the same time every hour. How the foghorn's rhythm lined up exactly with the tick of the clock. How the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. The air tasted metallic, like the inside of an old battery. I tried to distract myself with work. The maintenance sheet listed the foghorn diaphragm inspection, so I went out to the engine house with a wrench kit and flashlight. The walk down the slope was short, but the fog made it feel longer. The sea was invisible, just a dull roar beneath me. The path was slick with moss. Inside the engine house, the machines throbbed with steady noise. I took off the access panel and checked the seals. Nothing wrong. Everything gleamed with the same film of oil and salt that coated the rest of this place. Still, something made me linger. That sense that if I shut the door behind me, the sound of the ocean would vanish, and I'd be left with nothing but the heartbeat of machines. When I got back up to the house, the radio light was blinking. I picked it up. "Heseta, this is Florence. Weather front inbound. Expect sustained winds after midnight. Secure outer decks. Copy," I said. "Any visitors logged?" A pause. "Negative. Why?" "Just checking. Stay inside after dark," the operator said. "Winds from the west get unpredictable near the cliffs." Understood. By noon, the fog had thinned, revealing the horizon, a long black line where the sea met the sky. I made coffee, wrote down the morning data, and reread the rule card. It had become habit now, the ritual of scanning each line before the night began. I'd memorized every word, but reading them out loud grounded me. That's when I noticed something new. Below the printed list, in faint pencil, someone had added an 8th rule. Don't answer the radio between midnight and 1. The handwriting didn't match mine. I stared at it for a long time. The card had been in my breast pocket since the first day. I'd folded and unfolded it 100 times. I would have noticed new writing. I brought it to the window for light. The pencil looked aged, not fresh like it had been written years ago and only now surfaced through wear. When I radioed Florence later that afternoon, I didn't mention it. The hours dragged until dusk. The wind came earlier than forecast, sweeping the fog sideways in long ribbons. The lighthouse moaned with every gust. I ran the systems check twice, generator steady, lamp rotation constant, foghorn active. The lamp's motor had a comforting rhythm now, the low hum syncing with my pulse. By 18, I lit the lamp again. The sun went down like a bruise spreading across the water. The light cut through fog, sweeping the waves below. I sat by the radio, waiting for the next hourly call. White check. Normal. 20, quack check. Normal. The wind rattled the window panes like handfuls of sand thrown against glass. I drew the curtains tight, dimmed the lantern. Every so often I heard the faint squeal of the beacon's rotation, metal grinding faintly before it caught again. At 22, I climbed to the tower for inspection. The air inside was colder, thick with the smell of oil. I ran a hand along the rail, felt moisture beading there. My reflection wavered in the glass as the lamp turned. Everything in the room pulsed. Light, sound, air, as if breathing in rhythm. And then the delay came back. Each time the beam swept past, another flicker followed it. Weaker, out of sync by half a second, just like before. I pressed my hand against the glass. The faint light repeated the motion, like a mirror with lag. I wanted to record it, but the radio mic was downstairs, and the thought of leaving that chamber suddenly felt wrong, like stepping away might break something that shouldn't be broken. So I stayed until my watch beeped 22:30, then forced myself down the stairs. Halfway down, I noticed the sound beneath the storm. The low clang of metal, deliberate, like footsteps again. Only this time, they weren't coming from above. They came from below. The base level. The storage room I hadn't opened since the first night. The lock hung there on the latch, same as always. I stood at the threshold, wind howling through the cracks. The noise stopped. I waited a full minute, then forced myself to write it off as vibration. I even said it aloud. Vibration from the wind. Resonance through the metal. My voice sounded small. Back in the house, I closed the door, secured the latch, and checked the time. 23:48. I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping the pen until my fingers ached. I made my final pre-midnight log entry, took a sip of coffee that had gone cold, and stared at the radio. If the 8th rule was real, I was about to break it. Seekers, Sager. The storm hit full. Rain slapped against the walls. The foghorn blared every 30 seconds, louder than I'd ever heard it. The tower shook with each gust. The lamp held steady, beam cutting clean through chaos. Then, through the static and thunder, the radio light blinked. I froze. 3 blinks. Message incoming. The speaker crackled, voice faint through interference. Hecata, confirm you're secure. Repeat, confirm. Florence Station, same operator. I picked up the handset but didn't press transmit. The rule card lay open beside me, that new line visible under the lamplight. Don't answer between midnight and 1. The voice came again, louder this time. Daniel, do you copy? Wind speeds exceeding 60. Confirm your status. They'd never used my first name before. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the button. Hexata, respond. Another voice joined in, muffled, overlapping. 2 channels at once. Static spiked, then died. I waited. Nothing. The signal light kept blinking like a heartbeat. Finally, I exhaled and pressed the button. This is Hecata, secure. All systems functional. The line clicked. Then silence. 30 seconds later, the foghorn cut out. The sudden quiet was worse than the storm. The sound had been constant for days. Now it was gone. The air felt too big, like space had opened inside the silence. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Rain hit sideways. The path to the engine shed shimmered with standing water. The wind howled from below the cliff, not above, as though the sea itself was exhaling. When I looked up toward the tower, the beams still turned. Slow, steady. The secondary flicker had vanished. I started toward the shed to reset the foghorn. My boots slipped on wet stone. The flashlight beam bounced off the fog, illuminating only the first few feet. Halfway down, the generator kicked. A burst of noise, then quiet again. When I reached the shed, the door was swinging open on its hinges. The interior lights were out. I stepped inside, heart hammering. The machines were still. No hum. Then something moved in the corner. Just a shadow shifting as the beam from my flashlight wobbled. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. I closed the circuit breaker, reset the main switch. The horn started again, deep, alive, shaking the ground. I stayed until the sound stabilized, then backed out into the storm. Back in the house, soaked through, I shut the door, leaned against it, and listened to the foghorn's call roll back across the cliffs. It was the same sound as before. Almost. Every fourth blast had an echo, faint and late, as though another horn answered from far out at sea. I logged it. Mechanically, word by word, 0047. Foghorn reactivated. Secondary response audible. Possible reflection off cliffs. At Iowanwea, the horn's echo stopped. I shut the logbook. The house felt like it was holding its breath again. When I finally looked up, the rule card had slipped from the table. It lay face down on the floor. On the back, faint pencil marks formed new words, half erased by age. Keep the rhythm, or it will replace you. The storm broke just before dawn. The rain stopped as if a switch had been thrown. No tapering, no calm after the wind. Just silence so thick I could hear the generator ticking as it cooled. The air smelled like burnt salt and iron. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the last hour staring at the logbook, that last message still pressed into my brain. Keep the rhythm, or it will replace you. The words weren't new ink. They'd been written long ago, pressed deep enough that they reappeared only after years of handling. I'd turned the card over dozens of times before. Somehow, I'd never seen them until now. I poured coffee, too strong to drink, and stepped outside. The world looked stripped clean. Wet cliffs, pale sky, ocean rolling like gray mussel. The tower loomed above me, beams still spinning from the night's rotation. I could hear the faint grind of the mechanism through the mist. I walked up to the gallery deck to check the bearings. My reflection followed me in every glass pane, a tired shape in a yellow raincoat, small against the lens. Everything was intact. The system had done its job. And yet the log entries in the last week all blurred in my mind. Every shift bleeding into the next. Each night the same. The footsteps, the horn's echo, the sense that the building itself was alive and I was the one intruding. By the time I came back down, the fog had started to lift. I could see the keeper's house again, the winding road beyond it leading into the forest. For the first time, I thought about leaving. Nothing in the regulations said I couldn't drive into town on a supply run, but something about the idea felt wrong. Like walking away from the beam would make the light stop turning. I told myself that was nonsense. Still, I stayed. At 0900, Florence Station radioed in. Hasita, confirm post-storm status. I lifted the handset. All systems operational. Minimal damage. Copy that. You'll have company this afternoon. Inspector en route from Newport, ETA 1400. Understood, I said. The word company barely registered. The hours passed slow. I cleaned the lenses, wiped condensation from the glass, re-oiled the gear housing. The smell of lubricant stuck to my hands. When I looked at the clock again, it was already 2. No one came. At 14:30, I radioed Florence. This is Hasita. Confirm ETA for Inspector, Static answered. Then a clipped voice. Repeat. I repeated the message. Nothing. Just the hum of dead air. At 15 Atsu, the fog rolled back in. It was the wrong direction. Coming from inland this time, not from the sea. Within minutes, the world disappeared again. The radio crackled once more. A faint voice almost drowned in static. Inspection postponed. Roads slide. I caught only fragments, but it was enough. I wasn't getting visitors today. I sat at the table for a long time, listening to the foghorn. Each blast sounded closer, though I knew it hadn't moved. The echo from the previous night had vanished. Or maybe it had blended into the rhythm so perfectly that I couldn't tell anymore. When I finally looked at the clock, the hands pointed to 17:58, 2 minutes before lighting time. I stood, took the key from the pegboard, and climbed the tower. Lighting the lamp was supposed to be mechanical, procedural, a simple ritual. But I felt that same unease I'd had since the storm ended, as if the tower was watching to make sure I did it right. The machinery thrummed under my hands. The lens turned. The beam ignited. Tikur. Light on. Rule 1. Keep the lamp lit from 1800 to 600 without fail. I'd never broken it. None of them. Not once. By 1930, the fog grew denser than I'd seen it all week. The beam seemed to hit a wall, scattering in all directions. I radioed Florence, reporting visibility near zero. The operator confirmed, then added, "Stay on rotation. Don't deviate from your interval tonight." That phrase again, "don't deviate." "Copy," I said. The hours slid by. 20 Sir, 21, 22 Sir. Each rotation logged, each check completed. The rhythm of the place had its own heartbeat now. Light, foghorn, light, foghorn. I'd fallen into it without realizing. At 22:45, the generator hiccuped once. Not a full stop, just a brief falter in pitch. I logged it and stood by to check the panel, but it steadied on its own. The sound that replaced it wasn't mechanical. It was humming, a low tone, faint, echoing through the stairwell. Like a person idly humming under their breath somewhere high above. I froze, flashlight in hand. The air in the stairwell felt colder. The sound carried down, not from the lens room, but from halfway up, somewhere between the landings. I shut off the flashlight, held my breath. The humming stopped. I waited for footsteps next, but there were none. Only the faint creak of the stairs as the tower settled in the wind. I backed away, closed the stair door, and latched it. In the kitchen, I checked the clock. 23 to 10. The silence pressed in. I poured another cup of coffee I didn't want and stared at the curtains, wondering if I should open them. I didn't. 23:40. The foghorn blared again, deep enough to shake the glass in its frame. Then, underneath it, barely audible, a second tone, just like before, the echo. I flipped open the logbook, trying to write, but my hand hovered above the page. Something was wrong with the ink. The pen dragged, ink pooling unevenly. I grabbed a pencil instead and wrote in slow block letters. 23:40. Echo returned. When I looked up, the radio light was blinking. I didn't touch it. 02. The radio crackled to life on its own. "Heseta, come in." Florence's voice, but different. Sharper, closer, like the mic was pressed against the operator's mouth. I didn't answer. The rule card was in front of me. That 8th line burned into my head. "Heseta, respond." The foghorn sounded again, drowning the voice. Then the voice changed. It wasn't the operator anymore. It was Grant, Daniel. "Answer me." I went cold. His voice was flat, measured, unmistakable. "You're out of rhythm," he said. The radio clicked off. The horn went silent. For a long time, I couldn't move. The sound of the ocean was gone. Even the wind stopped. The whole world seemed to hold still. Then the lamp flickered. I ran to the tower. The spiral stair was dark, my flashlight beam cutting through a tunnel of fog and condensation. The sound of the motor strained, gears grinding harder than before. Halfway up, I saw it. The main gear wheel stuttering in place. I grabbed the crank, forcing it to align, oil dripping down my wrist. The smell of ozone filled the air. The motor caught again. Beam steady. When I looked through the glass, the ocean below had turned invisible. The light swept across nothing. At EW057, the foghorn restarted by itself. I checked the radio once more. Dead. Back in the kitchen, I saw the rule card on the table. The edges were soaked from my gloves. The pencil marks on the back had changed. The old line, "Keep the rhythm or it will replace you," was gone. In its place, a single new word had appeared, written in the same faded hand. Almost. I don't know how long I stood there. The sound of the foghorn returned to its normal interval, as if nothing had happened. At 06:00, I logged the night's final entry. Routine operations. Systems stable. No irregularities. But when I closed the logbook, I saw it again. A faint indentation, pressed from the next blank page through the paper grain. Heard steps. Logged none. The morning light came in pale and thin. A gray wash that made every surface look bleached. I sat at the table longer than I should have, waiting for the coffee to go cold before I even poured it. The fog outside hadn't lifted. The ocean was still hidden, though I could hear it, an endless shudder rolling under the cliffs. The lighthouse was quiet. Too quiet. When I cut the generator to change filters, I realized how dependent I'd become on that low hum. Without it, the house sounded hollow like an empty shell. I could hear the sea wind scraping at the eaves and the faint rhythmic drip from the gutter outside. At 07:30, I radioed Florence Station to confirm the all clear. The signal crackled before a man's voice answered. A new one. "Copy that, Hesita. No damage reports from our end. How's visibility?" "Moderate. Fog sitting low," I said. "Understood. No further reports required until 1600. That was unusual. Normally, they checked hourly. I started to ask why, but the line had already gone dead. I stared at the radio for a long time, listening to static. Routine, I told myself. They were probably short-staffed, but the relief that should have come never did. By late morning, I forced myself into work. Routine was the only thing that kept the nerves from getting in. I climbed to the lamp deck, cleaned the lenses, oiled the gears, ran the pressure check on the foghorn compressor. Every task was simple, methodical. The tower felt alive again when it was running, as if it needed attention to stay sane. When I descended the stairs, I counted the steps without meaning to. 51. That's how many it took from the lens room to the base. I'd counted them a dozen times before, and the number never changed. But that morning, when I reached the bottom, the door handle was cold, wet. I wiped my palm against my jacket, but the moisture smeared, leaving a faint streak of salt across the metal. The kind of residue you'd find from sea spray, but the door was sealed tight. No leaks, no drafts. I logged it anyway. 11:16, condensation on interior latch. At noon, the fog thickened again. It came in sudden, swallowing the yard, the cliffs, the path. The light turned to dim silver like I was living underwater. The world had been reduced to a few square feet of visible air. That was when the door knocked. 3 slow taps. I froze, hand still on the pen. It sounded exactly like wood on wood. A real, solid knock. I waited for a second round. Nothing. I stepped to the window, lifted one edge of the curtain. Nothing moved outside but fog. The porch was empty. The rational explanation came quickly. Maybe a loose shutter or a falling branch in the wind. But there was no wind. I walked to the porch anyway, opened the door. The air hit me cold and damp. Nothing there. The steps were slick with mist, the handrail glistening. But on the top step, faint but visible, was a single drop of red. Rust, I thought. Iron in the rain. Except it wasn't streaked. It was perfect, circular, like a bead of blood. I went back inside and shut the door. Logged the time. 12:02. Possible corrosion on upper step. Check when dry. Routine. Always routine. The rest of the day blurred into mechanical tasks. Tightening bolts, drying cables, checking battery levels. I tried the radio twice that afternoon. No answer. By 1740, the fog had turned the world into a wall again. Dusk never really came. The light just thinned into shadow. I read the rule card again, front and back. The writing hadn't changed since last night. The faint word almost was still there. I'd rubbed it once that morning to see if it was just residue, but it was too deep for that. Pressed hard, decades ago, into the pulp of the paper. When I lit the lamp at 18, the beam cut the fog like a blade. For the first time, I felt grateful for the machine's indifference, its steady rhythm, its refusal to care what else happened around it. I ate dinner, standing at the counter. The food had no taste. At 19 as, I began the routine radio check even though no one had asked for it. Static answered. I left the mic open for a minute anyway, just to hear my own breathing fill the silence. When I looked down at the logbook, my handwriting from earlier in the day looked different. The pressure marks were deeper, the letters uneven. I flipped back a few pages. Same thing. The entries from the last 3 nights, all indented like they'd been written by a heavier hand. I ran my finger along one. The groove was fresh. Someone had traced over them. 10. The foghorn sounded again. Regular intervals. But between the blasts, something else echoed. Fainter, further out. The same tone, slightly delayed, like a copy of the original horn sounding from open water. The same echo that had haunted every night since the storm. I walked to the window and parted the curtain. The beam swept across the fog, and for a second it caught something. Flat, reflective, low on the waterline. A surface glinting far out at sea. Then it vanished with the next rotation. I waited for the light to pass again. Nothing. Only waves and distance. I told myself it was driftwood, or a buoy, something harmless. When I stepped away, the radio light blinked once, then again, then went dark. I checked the clock. 22:07, 2 hours early for the pattern. The air pressure changed in the room, ears popping like I'd gone up in elevation. Then a low vibration started beneath the floorboards. The foghorn's rhythm wavered. It skipped a beat, paused, then resumed, slightly off timing, out of rhythm. The words came back. Keep the rhythm, or it will replace you. I didn't know what that meant, but my body reacted before thought caught up. I ran to the control board and flipped the manual override. The machine stuttered, then returned to its exact interval, every 30 seconds, clean and consistent. The air eased again. When I looked up, the clock read 22:30. The radio crackled faintly. One burst of static, then a whisper, soft, almost conversational. I couldn't make out the words. I moved closer. It wasn't Florence Station. It wasn't Grant. The voice was smaller, hesitant, like someone standing just behind me, trying to speak into the same space. I pulled the plug from the wall. The sound stopped. For the next hour, I sat in the chair without moving, the unplugged radio sitting dead beside me. The foghorn droned on, never missing another beat. At 23:59, I realized I'd been waiting, counting seconds, listening for the footsteps. They came right on time. Soft, metallic, perfectly measured, starting from the bottom of the tower and climbing. I didn't move. Each step echoed the same way as before, 15 in total. Then silence. When I looked at the clock again, it read 00.01. The rules said not to investigate. So I didn't, but the house felt different. The air had weight, and somewhere deep in the fog outside, another foghorn sounded. Clear, identical, half a second too late. I stayed awake until dawn, eyes on the wall, pen frozen over the logbook. When sunlight finally touched the curtains, I made one final entry for the night, lamp steady, visibility 0, intervals maintained. Heard steps, logged none. Morning came too clean, too quiet. The fog retreated before sunrise, leaving the cliffs sharp and raw against the sea. The water below looked polished, the surface flat enough to show the reflection of the tower. For the first time in days, the air was clear. You could almost pretend nothing had happened. I didn't trust it. The beam was still rotating when I climbed up to shut the lamp. The metal felt warmer than usual under my hand, like the lens had been burning hotter all night. I checked the gauge, steady. The oil level was normal. Everything was perfect in the wrong way. Down in the house, the air still smelled faintly of ozone. My handwriting in the log looked smaller than usual, tighter, like I'd been trying to write around something invisible. I rubbed my face, tried to shake off the static that seemed to hang in the air, and started another pot of coffee. At 07:30, I tried the radio. No response. Just the same steady hiss. The light flickered once, then went dark. I logged the failed check, same as always. The road was still closed, I assumed. Florence Station hadn't confirmed otherwise, and the last supply run had been delayed twice already. There wasn't much food left besides canned beans and hard bread. I ate, standing by the window, watching the surf strike the rocks. Each crash sounded closer, sharper, like the ocean had moved nearer overnight. By mid-morning, the world went silent again. No birds, no hum from the generator. Even the wind died. The stillness was so complete it made my ears ring. I went outside anyway, partly to convince myself the world still existed. The air was bright, heavy with salt. Every step on the gravel sounded louder than it should have. I circled the tower once, checked the support braces, the base vents, the oil drums. Everything intact. When I rounded the far side, I saw something that made me stop. Footprints. They started near the tower's base, where the metal door met the stone foundation, and trailed toward the path that led down to the shore. Bare feet, small, just 2 or 3 prints before they vanished into the gravel. I crouched, touched one. Damp, recent. My palm came away with fine grit and salt. I should have called it in. That was protocol. Instead, I stood there listening to the sea and realizing I could no longer tell how long I'd been here. When I returned to the kitchen, the logbook lay open to a blank page. I hadn't left it that way. My last entry from the night before had been near the end of the book. This was a clean page, untouched except for one faint mark. Near the top margin, the indentation of a single word pressed into the paper grain, as though written on a sheet above it. Continue. I shut the book, closed it hard enough to rattle the pen off the table. The rest of the morning passed in mechanical motions, cleaning, checking, moving. My hands worked while my mind drifted elsewhere. Every part of the lighthouse was familiar now. I could navigate it blindfolded, yet I felt like I was walking through a copy of it, something built just slightly out of phase. At noon, the fog returned, fast. It came in like smoke pouring through cracks, swallowing the cliffs in seconds. I watched it roll up the tower's side, slide past the window, and darken the room. The temperature dropped. Then the radio light came back on. I stared at it. Waited. The static shifted, soft bursts uneven. Then a voice cut through, faint and warbling. Net, call, identify. I lifted the mic. This is Hesed ahead. Identify yourself. No response. Repeat transmission. Static again. Then, clearer. Hecata, maintain pattern, confirm alive. I hesitated before pressing transmit. Alive and operational, I said. My own voice sounded thin. Pattern stable, the voice came back, almost relieved. Good, do not stop the light. No matter what, do not... The line died. I stood there holding the mic, listening to the empty hum. No matter what. I looked up at the clock. 12:14. Too early for the lamp, but I climbed the tower anyway, checked the bearings, polished the glass until it gleamed like water. The wind outside had picked up again, low and constant. By 15, the fog had thickened into a solid wall. I couldn't see the sea at all, but I could hear it. That slow drag of waves hitting rock. The rhythm of it had changed. Slower now, longer pauses between each crash, like breathing. When I came back down, something was off in the house. The smell. The air was sharp, clean, almost sterile, like ozone again. The curtains hung perfectly still. The radio light was off, but the logbook was open. Not just open, turned to the exact page I'd closed. And on that page, in small handwriting that wasn't mine, a new line had been added beneath the last entry. Lamp steady. Visibility 0. Continue. The pencil strokes were faint, pressed shallow, as though written years ago and only now resurfacing through pressure. I stared until the letters blurred. When I tried to write something over them, the pencil broke. Outside, the foghorn sounded again, its call deeper than before, almost hoarse. I counted the seconds between intervals. 30, then 32, then back to 30. Not consistent. I went to the control panel and checked the pressure. Normal, but the horn kept slipping out of rhythm, half a beat late each cycle. The generator light flickered. The hum faltered. I switched to manual override, rebalanced the load. The systems steadied. I listened hard to make sure everything aligned again. Lamp, horn, generator. Perfect rhythm. For maybe 10 minutes. Then the footsteps started again. This time from the yard. Slow, measured, crunching through the gravel outside the window. I didn't move. My pulse jumped so fast I thought I'd black out. The steps reached the porch, paused, then a soft knock came against the door. 3 times, the same as before. I stood there with one hand on the table edge counting the seconds. Nothing followed. Finally, I walked to the door and said, "Identify yourself." No answer. I opened the top latch, but not the lock. Through the glass pane, I saw nothing but fog. No shadow, no outline. Only the faint reflection of the light behind me. Then, faintly, from the direction of the tower, the foghorn sounded again. Wrong timing. That half-second delay back in place. I shut the latch and stepped away. The radio light blinked on once more, flickered, then stabilized. A voice spoke quietly through the static. "Hecata, maintain rhythm. You're drifting." I swallowed hard. "Identify. Static. Hecata, listen. If the light stops, it fills the gap. Do you understand? What fills the gap?" I said. No answer. The signal died again. The air pressure dropped. The walls creaked as though exhaling. The clock ticked twice, then stopped. I tapped the faceplate. The hands didn't move. Both pointed to 1647. I went outside to check the sky. Couldn't see it. The fog was too thick, heavy as wet wool. The light from the tower still turned above, faint and diffused, cutting slow arcs through the haze. I stood there watching it, counting. Each rotation took 10 seconds. Then I noticed something. The pause between rotations. Every time the beam passed over me, it took just slightly longer to return. Not by much, maybe half a second, but enough. I checked my watch. It matched the clock exactly. 16:47. Frozen. When I came back inside, the logbook had closed itself. At least, that's how it looked. I reached for it and found the pages damp. The pencil lay beside it, tip cracked, graphite smeared on the table. Under the lamp, I saw new words faintly embossed into the wood grain itself, written over and over in uneven script. Continue. 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 I stared at it until the letters stopped making sense. The foghorn called again. I counted the seconds. 30, then 31, then 32, still drifting. I grabbed the wrench and headed for the tower because that's what the rules said to do. Keep the rhythm. No matter what, the wrench felt heavy in my hand as I climbed. Each step groaned under my boots, the metal echoing like a hollow drum. I kept counting to steady my nerves, 20, 30, 40, until I reached the top landing. The sound of the gears filled the space, low and rhythmic, like breathing in steel. The lamp turned smoothly, but the light felt wrong. The beam should have swung past every 10 seconds, yet when I timed it, each revolution dragged longer. 11 seconds, then 12. I checked the rotation counter. It ticked steady, unbothered. Mechanical perfection. The machine insisted nothing had changed, but the air told me otherwise. I could hear the faint delay, the lamp pausing mid-turn like something caught in its rhythm. I tightened the central bolt, adjusted the gear tension, checked the oil levels. Every gauge read normal. The delay persisted. When I leaned close to the main glass housing, I noticed tiny smudges. Finger marks, half moons of moisture on the inside surface. My stomach dropped. I'd cleaned those panes yesterday, sealed the chamber myself. I pulled off the panel. Inside, the glass was dry, clean, no prints. I pressed the panel back into place and stood still, trying to hear if the storm had returned. The fog pressed hard against the windows, erasing the horizon. The beam cut across it like a pulse through smoke. For a moment, I thought I saw movement out there. Something in the fog shifting opposite the rotation of the light. I blinked, and it was gone. The foghorn called again, off rhythm. I whispered the words out loud, steadying myself. Keep the rhythm. Below me, the tower creaked. It wasn't the wind. It was deeper, slower, like something heavy dragging across the foundation. I started down the stair, flashlight beam bouncing ahead of me. The sound rose with me, faint at first, then louder, metal scraping on stone. I froze halfway, one hand gripping the rail. The noise stopped. "Grant?" I said before thinking. The word echoed, unanswered. No one should have been here. The access road was closed. I told myself it could be expansion again. Heat shifting the base plates, maybe a loose brace. The rational mind reached for structure, but my pulse didn't care. I descended the rest of the way fast, boots ringing against steel, wrench still clutched tight. When I reached the bottom, I aimed the flashlight at the door. The latch sat unbroken. Everything exactly as I'd left it. Still, the sound had come from down here. I was sure of it. The foghorn groaned again. The echo followed, that half-beat behind, like a voice trying to keep up. I checked my watch. 17:32. The clock in the house was still stuck at 16:47. I didn't know which to believe anymore. When I stepped outside, the fog wrapped around me like wet cloth. The air was heavy, muffled. The beam above barely reached through it now. just a glow spinning in slow arcs. I could hear the horn rolling out over the water, deep and low. Then another, fainter tone answered from somewhere beyond the cliff. It wasn't an echo. The spacing was too irregular. I walked toward the edge until I could see the faint shimmer of water below. The rocks gleamed black, slick with spray. For a split second, I saw light, my own beam, flash across the waves. Then, further out, a second beam blinked back. I stared, not breathing. It was the same pattern, same angle, the same 10-second rotation. Only this one turned half a beat late, just like the echo of the horn. It couldn't be another station. The nearest lighthouse was miles south, and its signal pattern was different. The second beam flickered once, then went out. The fog swallowed everything. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me not to run. When I reached the porch, I felt the boards vibrating faintly underfoot, like the generator was struggling. Inside, the light above the desk flickered. The logbook had slid open again, though I hadn't touched it since morning. A new entry had appeared, same faded pencil, same handwriting that wasn't mine. 47. Rotation matched. Sequence complete. I didn't write that. I hadn't even looked at the clock yet. I tore the page out and stuffed it into my pocket, heart hammering. The torn edge looked old, yellowed, like it had been in that book for years. The radio light blinked twice. I didn't move. Then the voice came. Faint, through static, low and distorted. Hiseta. It's close now. Stay on rhythm. I pressed transmit. Who is this? Static again, then. If the light stops, it won't need you anymore. The line went dead. Outside, the foghorn skipped another beat. I grabbed my jacket and stepped back out, flashlight cutting through the mist. The sound of the sea had changed again. Sharper, more erratic, as if waves were crashing where no rocks should be. I followed, the path toward the engine shed, forcing my breath to stay even. When I opened the shed door, the smell hit me first. Burnt oil and wet metal. The generator was running, but slower, like it was straining against itself. The flywheel spun in lazy rotations. I checked the meter. RPM down 20%. Fuel normal. Then I saw the handprint. On the glass of the meter housing, clear as day, small, smudged with salt. Same shape I'd seen inside the lamp room earlier. I wiped it with my sleeve. The print smeared, but didn't disappear. The residue wasn't moisture, it was oil. A chill crawled up my spine. The machines here weren't supposed to leak oil. Not like that. The generator coughed, sputtered, then steadied again. The foghorn blared. The echo followed, perfectly matched this time, the two tones overlapping. I stood there listening, realizing the rhythm had fixed itself. For the first time in days, everything was perfectly synchronized. When I went back to the house, the air felt lighter, almost peaceful. The radio stayed silent. The lamp turned on time. The horn held steady. The quiet should have felt like relief, but it didn't. It felt like being watched. I made myself eat, logged the maintenance, wrote down every reading in clean, tight handwriting. For once, nothing interrupted me. At 23:45, I sat back and exhaled. The fog outside had thinned. I could see the faint outline of the cliff rail again. The beam swept across it, regular as breath. For a moment, I believed the worst had passed. Then I noticed the second light again. Far out over the water, faint, but real, another beam rotated. Same speed, same angle, same timing. Only this time, when my beam swept back around, The other one didn't follow half a second behind. It matched exactly. Perfect synchronization. I stood, pressed my face to the window. The reflection of my lamp passed across the glass, blinding me. When my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw movement behind that distant glow, like the silhouette of a figure standing at its base. The fog swallowed it before I could be sure. The foghorn blared again. 2 tones now, indistinguishable from each other. I looked down at the logbook. The pencil had rolled off the table. The last entry I'd written, 1747, rotation matched, had been erased clean off the page. In its place, pressed faintly into the paper without ink, were 3 words. Shift complete. Continue. When I glanced up, the clock on the wall started again. 47, same as before. It ticked once, then stopped. Outside, both beams, mine and the one over the water, rotated together. The clock didn't tick again. It sat there with its hands locked at 1647, the second hand trembling like it was trying to move but couldn't. The sound I expected, a click, a hum, anything, never came. Only the soft pulse of the foghorn filled the silence, regular and steady. I stood at the window until my reflection blurred into the glass. The sea below looked flat and unreal, like a sheet of metal. Out beyond it, the second beam still turned, cutting through the haze in perfect sync with mine. Every time the light crossed, the room flashed white for a heartbeat, then sank back into shadow. I forced myself to turn away. I'd written shift complete. Continued too many times in my head already. The rules had stopped being rules. They were instructions now. Mechanical, endless, indifferent. I walked to the radio and flicked it on. Static. I tried the frequency for Florence, then a wideband sweep. Nothing but the faint buzz of open air. The green power light flickered with each rotation of the lamp upstairs, like the current itself was tied to the beacon. Station Florence, this is Hesed ahead, I said. Do you copy? No response. I repeated it. Again. Then again. My own voice sounded small against the static. When the horn sounded again, the echo didn't follow. Both tones had fused completely now. One unbroken wave of sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. It was too smooth, too precise to be natural. The beam swung past the window. A second later, something outside caught the light. A shape on the cliff edge. At first I thought it was driftwood, something thrown up by the storm. But the shape moved slightly, just enough for the light to catch the outline of a head, shoulders, a man's frame. I froze. The next rotation came, and the shape was gone. I grabbed the flashlight, the wrench still lying by the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The air hit me cold and electric. The fog had thinned enough that I could see the cliff rail, the tower above glowing faintly. Everything beyond was swallowed in silver haze. Grant, I called. My voice came back wrong, flattened by the mist. I walked toward the tower. Gravel crunched underfoot, too loud in the stillness. Each footstep echoed against the walls like I was walking through a hollow room. When I reached the tower's base, the metal door was closed, the lock unbroken. I touched it anyway. The handle was warm. The foghorn sounded again. The echo followed a second late this time. Only a second, but enough to make me flinch. Keep the rhythm, I whispered. The phrase had become a mantra I didn't believe in anymore. Inside the tower, the air was still. I climbed, counting each step, the flashlight beam slicing the stairwell ahead of me. 30, 40, 51. At the top, the lamp rotated perfectly steady as ever. I leaned against the glass and looked out toward the water. The second beam still turned, but now it looked closer. Too close. A wave of static hissed through my radio, still clipped to my belt. "Hesita," a voice whispered. I froze. Confirm alive. I pressed the transmit key. Alive. Confirmed. Who is this? The reply came fast, overlapping itself in static. Stay inside the light. Do not leave it. What are you talking about? No answer. Just the same words, repeated slower. Stay inside the light. Then the line went dead. I turned toward the stair, and that's when I heard it. The slow clang of footsteps coming from below. Not echoes. Real, heavy, metallic. I shone the flashlight down the spiral. The beam hit nothing but fog halfway down. The sound stopped. Then came again, higher this time. Closer. I gripped the wrench tighter. Identify yourself. No response. Only the faint vibration through the steps. A subtle trembling beneath my boots. The motor of the lamp whined suddenly, high-pitched, like it was straining against friction. The rotation slowed. "Come on," I muttered, kneeling to check the housing. The gears looked fine. I tightened the bolt anyway, hands slick with sweat. When I looked up again, the second beam outside was gone. I blinked, thinking the fog had hidden it. But the horizon was clear now. Open water stretching to nothing. The only light left was mine. The radio crackled. "Daniel," the voice said. Grant's voice this time, unmistakable. I hesitated. "Grant, where the hell are you?" "Don't let it stop," he said. "If it stops, you're not Daniel anymore." Then silence. The wrench slipped from my hand and clanged against the floor. I picked it up with shaking fingers. Not Daniel anymore. The phrase looped in my head. I didn't want to know what it meant. I forced the motor back into alignment. The lamp steadied. The beam resumed its perfect 10-second rotation. I stayed there for another hour, maybe more, watching the light move, counting each sweep until my eyes blurred. Every turn felt heavier, slower, but I didn't dare stop it. At 05:59, the first trace of dawn touched the horizon. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The fog thinned, and I could see the cliffs, the sea, the empty road. Everything ordinary again. I shut the lamp at 06 Uberlader sharp, logged the entry, and descended the stairs. When I stepped outside, the air smelled clean. No ozone, no rust, no burnt oil. The sea glittered under the rising sun. For the first time, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe it had only ever been exhaustion, paranoia, mechanical noise twisted into meaning. Then I saw the footprints. Not old ones. Fresh, a full set, leading from the tower door to the edge of the cliff, and back again. 2 sets of the same boots, mine, identical tread. Perfect spacing, one going out, one returning. Only I hadn't left the tower. I walked to the edge, following the prints. They stopped where the ground met air. No disturbance, no drag marks. Just clean impressions turning back as though I'd stood at the drop and decided against it. The wind shifted. Behind me, the foghorn gave a single, long call. No echo this time. When I turned back toward the tower, I saw movement in the glass of the lamp room. My own reflection, half a second behind. I waited for it to catch up. It didn't. It smiled first. Then the beam swept past, and the glass was empty. I stood there until the sun climbed fully above the horizon, the lighthouse gleaming white against the cliff. The radio on my belt clicked once, faint but clear. Hesit ahead, confirm watch complete. My throat was dry. Confirmed, I said. Good, the voice replied. Welcome to the rotation. The line went dead. I looked up at the light, already turning again on its automatic cycle, though I hadn't started it. The reflection inside moved when I didn't. The rhythm held. Perfect, unbroken. And I realized then that whatever had been waiting for the gap had finally found its place. I signed the log one last time. The graphite bit deep into the page, darker than it should have. Lamp steady. Visibility clear. All systems normal. Then, without meaning to, I wrote another line underneath, in smaller handwriting that didn't quite feel like mine. Continue. The clock started again. 16:47.